Been a couple of minutes, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And as obviously people are probably still going to be pouring in, but let's just get straight into it. Well, hello everyone, and thank you for coming today and taking time out of your busy day and schedule wherever you are in the world to spend the next 60 minutes with us and talk about some really, really cool topics today. And we have a great, like I said, we have a great set of panelists, which I'll introduce here shortly and everything. But welcome to today's panel discussion. Today, we're going to be talking about migrating from a SQL Server to an Azure and Microsoft Fabric environment. You know, what works, what breaks, and more importantly, how to avoid costly mistakes. So thank you very much for joining us. You know, SQL Server truly has been the backbone of enterprise analytics just absolutely for decades. But as organizations move towards more modernized platforms such as Azure SQL, you got Synapse, and now you have Microsoft Fabric, many teams are learning, and sometimes really the hard way, that migration is not simply a lift and shift exercise. And honestly, what often starts as a technical initiative quickly becomes an architectural and operational and organizational challenge. Performance surprises, unexpected cloud costs, that's a big one, governance gaps, brittle pipelines, and really the growing complexity can derail even the well-funded modernization efforts. And so today's discussion is about separating what actually works in practice from what sounds good in theory. And today we're going to be focusing on what to modernize first, what to leave alone, where migrations most often go wrong, how governance, orchestration, and metadata quietly make or break the outcomes. And finally, how teams can prepare not just for Azure today, but for Microsoft Fabric and the continuous changes that they bring tomorrow. Hi, my name is Duan Ace. I'm a solutions architect with Warescape, and today I'll be moderating. Today's conversation. And as I introduced very, very briefly, we're not really at all, but I am joined by an experienced and extremely knowledgeable panel who has been on the front lines of the SQL to the Azure and migration patterns. And I'd like to kind of go through each of the panelists and let them just introduce themselves. And Carl, can you please start with you?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Carl Richards. I'm representing Engaging Data today and been working with SQL Server and Warescape for nearly 20 odd years now.
Great. Thank you so much, Carl, for that. And Mike.
Hi, Mike Migalski, founder of Infovia. We've been a Warescape partner for about 8 years, and prior to that, I was a customer. So very much grounded in the metadata, power of metadata and code generation.
Thank you very much, Mike. And follow up next is Lorenz.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Lorenz Kindling. I'm a managing consultant at Scalefree and mainly working with data architecture and data modeling in highly regulated environments, and have there made a lot of experience with Warescape and SQL Server before. So really excited for this panel.
We're excited to have you, Lorenz. Thank you. And finally, we have Indika.
Thanks, Duan. Hi, I'm Indika. I'm a solutions architect, like Duan for Warescape. Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much. All right. And without further ado, honestly, let's just jump straight into it. So first question I'm going to open up to the panelists, right? So from your experience, right, what's the most common false assumption teams make when they think that a SQL Server migration will be quote unquote straightforward? Indika, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think that the main thing that we find with customers is that they think that they are moving into the same platform, and it's a different platform. One can choose SQL Server in Fabric, but if we choose the warehouse or any of the other flavors, it is a different target. So we will find that it will support most of the things that we actually do. However, it will not support everything the same way. So we have to keep in mind that we are moving to a different target and not just to the same database in the cloud.
And does anyone, the technologies, right? Microsoft has actually done a fairly, well, I guess this is subjective, right? A decent job of trying to keep their technologies to speak the same language, using the same technologies. And what are, for the panelists, right? And kind of as a follow-up, right? What of those technologies between your traditional SQL on-prem setups are different in technologies like Fabric and Synapse and all that?
Yeah. Are
Sorry,
you
go
going
ahead.
back to Mike? Yeah. So when we actually move to Fabric, we're actually working with an underlying infrastructure, which is essentially different. TCQL is very close, but not everything is actually there. So some functions and some data types can be different. Not everything that we're doing currently on-prem will be the same way as we will do on Fabric.
Can we, and does everyone else agree with that? That, obviously the technology is different. Is it really as straightforward as people think, this migration, doing a
Uh,
migration?
So I think in general, I agree. I think, for example, a good example is indexes. You build them a lot on SQL Server because you need them for performance, but you won't need them on Fabric, all the same indexes. And we're not talking about migrating data there, so you can leave a lot of them out. So I think these are just some examples where you need to really think about, does it make sense to migrate? But in general, I think a lot of time when you talk about migration, it can be straightforward, but you need to define what you mean by migration. Because a lot of time when people talk about migration, they also think about model redesigning or changing tools, governance overhauls, when maybe migration is first a more platform change and technical based. So it doesn't, you need to really think about the scope of the migration. What do we really want to achieve?
Okay.
Yeah, I think you're
And then,
right, Lorenz. And I would mention, we've run into issues on Fabric where it's a moving target. We don't know what capabilities are going to be there today. And as was mentioned a bit ago, uh, there's a subset of T-SQL that's supported. One thing that we got bit on was the absence of sequence generators on Fabric. So you have to build your own if at this point, but it could be tomorrow that those are available. The ability to back up and restore, or rather clone a database, was something that was fairly recently introduced. Or I say database, the warehouse capability in Fabric that was recently introduced, and it works really well. But prior to even a month ago, you had to build that on your own. So it's a moving target right now if you're moving to Fabric.
and that actually brings up a really good point, Mike. And I'd like to point this next follow-up question to Carl, right? So when it comes, some of the biggest risks when it comes to the migration, as we've just identified, right, is obviously the technology component of it, but it's a lot more to that, right? When any sort of migration project includes technical capabilities, you need architectural and as well as organizational. So of those three, which one do you think is the biggest risks when it comes to migration efforts? Technical, architectural, or organization, or all of them, or none of them?
Well, to be honest, my biggest risk is architectural because organizations underestimate how the cloud system separates storage, compute, and governance. I mean, on-premise solutions tend to be massive beasts, whereas Azure, Synapse, and Fabric require modular service orientated thinking. So if you don't get that right, you end up with huge architectural gaps, and it will cause eventually your technical debt to become extremely difficult to correct post migration.
So,
I
so
think I
does
agree with you, Carl. I think that if we consider that it's our job as data professionals to make it the least impactful on the organization,
Yeah.
then organization should be the least impacted. Maybe we have to hire a cloud engineer instead of a DBA or something along that line, but that's more internal organization than it is enterprise organization. So I think I agree with you on uh, the technical or architectural impacts. And I would say we need to look at it as an opportunity, not just a lift and shift, but an opportunity to leverage the power of the cloud. We'll talk about that more a little later in the discussion.
And I think it goes a little bit back to the scope again, right? If you make it an organizational thing, want to change everything at once, you will get problems with that. But I think the first part of a migration to the cloud is first always more technical or architecture focused. And I think you should keep the scope like that as well. Don't make it too big, because in the end, the technical stuff you can find solutions for, where sometimes with the organizational stuff, it's really political and hard to find solutions when you look at it and you make it much more complex than it needs to be, I think.
when you look at all the components that is involved in a migrations, you guys have already outlined there's quite a few moving parts, right? And in all y'all's opinions, which ones would you personally tackle first, in a migration project? Which one, what do you think is the most important piece to address first?
I think in the vein of finding the right opportunity, it's not taking the technical approach, it's taking the business use case approach. Where is the most value in leveraging the power of the cloud, whether it's computer storage? Are we trying to archive data for in cold storage? Is that the best opportunity, or more likely it's something to do with scaling the elasticity of compute at high usage times, or leveraging AI against our data? If that's a business opportunity that you're looking for, then tackle that first. But I think you really need to look at what's the business benefit that we're getting, what can we unleash the power of the cloud against, and tackle one of those opportunities first, and take that iterative approach that was mentioned by Lorenz.
So, Mike, your approach is more of let's take a step back and instead of just doing a lift and shift, let's see how we can utilize this new technology to extend what we have currently today. Is that correct?
100%.
100%.
100%.
Does everyone else agree with that? Or are there any kind of gotchas hidden behind that approach that we're not thinking of?
I would say I agree, especially with the use case of business-driven procedure. But I would be careful to not try to make too much new improvements and new things directly, because what you get often, or what I at least see a lot, is that companies have in the end two running systems. They have the old system, which is still running on SQL Server, and then they have the new one in Fabric. And because they already try to change so much, or make new stuff and use the cloud's tools, you can't really replicate what you have in the old system. And then you can never say, can I turn the old system off? Is this new report done? So sometimes I think maybe the easier way is to first really do a lift and shift and just bring it over there. And then after that, start to think about improvements and how can we really leverage the cloud. But yeah, I think there's a lot of discussions essentially at that point, because I think both options are really viable, and a lot of times you need to show the business as a lot of times as well what is the benefit of the cloud. So you're stuck a little bit between both worlds. But yeah, maybe the other ones can elaborate.
We might be able to do both, kind of have our cake and eat it too, and kind of look at the business use cases as our pilot and build some pilot capabilities or solutions. And then there's a tipping point that always like you said, you don't want to end up supporting two systems. So there's a tipping point there where you say, okay, we're all in now, and that's the time to do your lift and shift of your remaining capability. So I think I would say both, and not either or.
And thoughts from the rest, Indika, Carl, any thoughts on those?
Yeah, I think that the master data, yes, because the master data in the end is what the business is going to understand and what we really know properly. So you do need to show some value to the business also in the migration. It's not going to be a one-to-one thing as well. So there will be time to improve a little bit. Yeah, maybe some of the not so essential stuff can be used maybe previous to that to actually check that the process works. But I'm with Mike. It should be something that we all understand and that shows value to the business, because otherwise we get stuck into, okay, so what was this for exactly? And that's not going to really push things over once they work.
And I agree with Lorenz, you really don't want to be stuck between two systems, running them and supporting them at exactly the same time. You want to move over as quickly as possible and have one to live with.
Those are great insights from everyone. Thank you. And I think this is actually a phenomenal segue into actually our next piece, right? So if, when it comes to the migration efforts, right, obviously we've identified that it's not just a technical effort, right? And so if the problem is not just technology, let's talk about where teams should actually focus their efforts first. So, when you look at an existing SQL environment, what should teams modernize first to create momentum without destabilizing the business? And I think before we even answer that question, let's define what we mean by modernization. That seems like a hype word we always throw out there that you hear in the industry, right? What is modernization for you first before we answer that? Lorenz, what do you think is modernization?
Yeah, so like I said, I'm more a friend of doing modernizations after you have done most of the lift and shift, let's say. But I think the first few things you should look at is loading patterns, because you just have much more options now in the cloud. You have live streaming services. You're not focused on SSIS packages and that need to run, right, that you have in SQL Server. So I think there is a huge potential. And the other thing I think oftentimes gets overlooked is cost control, because you come a lot of times from SQL Server on-premise. You have the server in somewhere downstairs, right? Nobody talks about, but it's essentially paid off in the cloud. You have yeah, ongoing costs, and when you just do a lift and shift, maybe you have a lot of indexes that get storage that are not needed anymore, so, and stuff like this. So I would really try to focus on the cost and performance early, so you just get the benefit for the business as well. These are for me the two top priorities, I think. And then for sure AI use cases and stuff like this. But
Sure.
if I just look at the data platform, sorry,
Yeah, I
Michael.
would add the power of sharing your data, because on the cloud you have the opportunity to share outside your organization. And Gartner came out with a report, it's maybe been a year ago, but I think they said it was organizations that shared their data outside of them, out of themselves, right? Out to their partners, to their customers, to their clients. If they share their data externally, they're 6 to 8 times more I think they said profitable or successful. And so it shows the power of sharing your data. And I think the cloud, enables that. So you have to have that in mind. You have to have the AI use cases. Where can we leverage the power of the cloud to bring the logic to the data instead of the other way around? For most of our careers, we've been bringing the data to the logic, and now the cloud and AI really demands that we're bringing the compute and the logic to the data. And with the scale and the veracity of our data, it's a requirement. So we need to be thinking in those terms as well when we're modernizing. And then there's the metadata approach. We kind of have a segment a little later in the discussion on that. I think that's maybe the most important of all, but I'll hold off on diving into that one.
Thank you, Mike. So what I'm kind of hearing a theme here, right? So the idea of what we mean by modernization, just purely based on the anecdotal responses given so far, is that modernization is more equatable to, is our data ready to be AI ingested, without turning this into an AI panel, right? Which is the hot topic of today. But is that what I'm hearing? Is everyone in agreement of that when we talk about modernizing?
To be honest, modernization for me is just a clear vision of a target state. So it's all about just knowing where you want to get to from where you are at this point in time. And the only way that you could ever tackle that is with like small targeted incremental changes. I don't see that it necessarily needs to be AI specific, but it is moving towards a process where you want to be, or a place that you want to be.
Great insight. And this is actually a great follow-up, right? So, understanding the benefits of being out in the cloud, data sharing, accessibility to AI-ready tools, all that kind of good stuff, right? But, in the actual migration process, right, what should teams avoid? How do teams, sorry, let me rephrase this better. How should teams avoid recreating all the complexities of on-prem SQL environments as they're moving to something like Fabric or Synapse or Azure, Azure SQL? And what should you modernize first? What should you leave alone? Going back to your point of that incremental changes, right? What exactly should people be focusing on first?
Well, I think you do not need to have the complete lineage as you actually had it before. Try to get to where you want to get, and then look at what the products and what the tech is actually offering you actually get there. Don't think you need to have the same lineage, the same transformations, the same. You do not need exactly what you had to get to where you want to be. So simply think about the technology as a means to an end, and not try to replicate what you already have, because maybe you do not need that anymore. So that means that you need to think differently of what you're using, and not only where you want to go.
I would agree.
I think I agree with you.
I agree as well. But I think you really need to be careful, especially with changing transformations and stuff that are essentially already working in the old world and where people did the testing and the reports are used. I think you really need to be careful to not get essentially trust issues in the new platform because you're changing stuff. But yeah, I would agree. Just need to be careful. Maybe I have a general, more technical question in the round, so I don't want to throw everything up. But what do you think is the biggest benefit of the one lake? Because I mean, the thing of Fabric is that you essentially write everything into the one lake. I'm just interested what you think is the biggest benefit of that and what you can use it for.
Exploration, use cases we haven't considered before. Turning AI loose on that data and letting it tell us, we used to call it unsupervised machine learning, but AI can tell us things that we've never thought, answer questions we haven't thought to ask specifically.
Well, would you agree, for example, so I think we talked about AI a little bit. I actually think AI is not so much the benefit is not the move to the cloud that now we can do AI, but AI is more still you need good data to focus. So I think it's still a data thing, not really a platform thing. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that you can use one lake. You can think about it as that one place where you're going to have all your data, and all your data are going to be files. So if used properly, you can use different engines to access that same data. Other than that, one can think about it as ADLS with the shortcuts, but it simply opens the idea that all your governance and all your sharing will be in one spot. So it's a little bit like a door where you can have all your data together, and then you can access it from different spots.
So I've got an interesting question to kind of piggyback off of all of this, right? Talking about the one lake, understand, right? That's Microsoft's deal for data dumps, right? And someone please correct me here, because now broaching the edge of my knowledge truly of how it all works under the hood. But if I understand correctly, one lake is in the Azure world, Microsoft world, is really just ADLS buckets that's designed in such a structured way. And there could be folks out there that still uses on-prem SQL or some other solution where they utilize ADLS, right, as their dumping ground. Why, if they need to, right, if they're interested in migrating, is that a good enough use case or a business case to say that we want to move to Fabric because we can use one lake to explore our data? Our data already lives on ADLS. We still have all those capabilities. Do we or do we not?
Well, I think you would not have exactly the same capabilities because you will not be able to access it with the same engines. So if you have it on-prem with ADLS, it is true, you have a data lake. It can be perfectly well organized, but you cannot use all those cloud services that can allow you to access it, to share all that metadata level with other tools. And that's a little bit what is kind of not implicitly said. Or explicitly said, but you can access it with other tools, with other engines. The data lake is actually engine agnostic. So maybe today is going to be Spark or maybe Fabric, maybe tomorrow is going to be something else. And that's a little bit where the doors open and you're more future proof. And of course, the fact that you have all your data landed inside files is always an advantage.
Great insight.
And you don't have to choose between those tools. You can kind of have all of them at once.
You don't have to choose, yeah.
Your data scientists and your BI analysts and your ad hoc SQL, users all executing against the same data.
So ultimately, it comes down to convenience. It's more convenient because you don't have to worry about that overhead of managing different tools. And
It's a wider set of opportunities.
Opportunities, options, features. Yeah, I would agree.
awesome. Well, as we are, I think we've hammered that one really well, and I think this is a great, actually, another great segue into our next discussion here is about the actual, kind of the pre-planning that you do for a migration exercise, right? So, before migrating to the target platform that you're interested in, Fabric, Synapse, everything, how valuable do you guys think it is to build a sandbox SQL model to test all of the assumptions, the structures, the logic, the transformations that we sort of, touched very briefly on earlier? In your opinion, does it make sense to create a mirrored copy, run it in parallel, or how what do you guys think about sandbox SQL environments for migration? Carl, we're
I think if it's your first one, then you got to have somewhere where you can learn. Either like we referred to earlier, is learning what business cases that you can sandbox and prototype. That would be one strong example. But if you've never run one of these conversions before, you're going to be surprised by the issues that you encounter. And so, like we've done several of them, so we kind of know those. So I would say we don't necessarily leverage that sandbox as much on your third, fourth, fifth migration as you would on your first one.
Agree with Mike. You quite easily, quickly, and you find all the conversion issues, all the performance regressions, all the issues with indexes really quite quickly and easily, but just by doing that migration into a sandbox first.
But I want.
And for all the, go ahead, Lauren. Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, but I also want to go back to my point at the beginning. I still think you need to be really disciplined. Maybe do it with one use case, try it out, look where differences are and stuff where you need to, redesign something, validate your numbers, right? Compare it, but then don't keep it up forever. Try to really migrate then at some point, because then we get again to the two shadow implementations and issues. But in general, I think you should always do a test run with at least one use case before. I think it just makes sense.
For those here on the panel who has, worked and done a lot of these migrations, what surprised you the most during those migration practices? Something that no matter how much planning you had, you never thought you would have to run into this. I'm sure there's many, but
I think there's always surprises. We've always planned when we've helped a client migrate. We've planned for 3 iterations. The first is just to eke out those surprises. As we've done more of them, we have less surprises, and we've actually our most recent migrations have only taken 2 iterations. We make sure we migrate once. We do validation, comparing the old and the new. Adjust for what wasn't accounted for, and usually that's business logic. Usually that's the hidden details. The devil's in the details of where they've hidden some logic, and there's functions or SQL functions or capabilities that are leveraged in on-prem SQL, for example, that aren't available in Fabric, for example. And you eke that out in that first iteration. Usually in the past, it's taken us the second iteration to get comfortable, and then the third was the final. And in the past couple, we've canceled our third iteration because the second iteration of migration was sufficient. So we've essentially reduced a cycle by learning from past experiences.
Great, thank you, Mike. And does Mike's experience resonate with anyone else here on the panel who has done these migrations before? Does it seem very similar, different experience?
I've had a different experience where data quality issues have been masked by on-premise hardware. And then when we've migrated, we've had significant degradation in performance. So that's one of my biggest headaches.
And did you utilize something like a sandbox sort of setup to help with those?
Yeah, we were using a sandbox to understand and make performance improvements to try and bring the performance back to what we were seeing on the hardware.
I think it's actually funny, right? A lot of times you think it's the other way around. You go to the cloud, and now we will have this huge performance boost. SQL Server on-premise was super slow. And then you do the migration, you find out, okay, it's actually not that much slower because it was not built for Fabric in the first place. So you have refactoring to do for sure. And what comes with it as well is, I think, cost again. In the beginning, a lot of times the cost is really, really high and you need to get it down. The same goes a little bit for chaos in the cloud. So in the beginning, people like to try out, you build warehouses, you make user spaces, and you really need to be careful to limit who can build something on Fabric and how you want to structure it. I think that's a huge pitfall oftentimes when going to the cloud, because there are so many possibilities, and you come probably, especially when you come from SQL Server, from a more simple environment, I would say, that you don't get it blown up everywhere and everybody builds something.
Yeah, I think
I think
back
it
to what
depends on
Mike
what you're
was
measuring.
back to what
Go
Mike
ahead,
was
Indika.
saying. Yeah, of course, the transformations will be different. Some may be around, some may not be around. And then back to what Lawrence was actually saying, the ingestion is different, but then it may not be so much about how fast it is actually getting there. But if you make, I'm going to say, a mistake, or if you're doing the ingestion not in the proper way, it's going to cost you a lot more cost that you do not actually understand where it is actually coming from. You should always take a lot of time and attention to make sure that the ingestion is being done how the cloud, in this case Fabric, says so.
Great. Thank you for that. Thank you for that feedback, Indika. So, as based off what we were talking about and all the things that you can do to prepare yourself to all the pre-planning activities, right? Sandboxing is good ways, what we've just discussed is a good approach to be able to test all of these things technically, make sure that it all works before you do the big, whether it takes a couple of iterations, but transition, right? So at the end of the day, right, sandboxing really does shows us what might break technically. But let's talk a little bit about governance, orchestration, and metadata that determines whether a migration really holds together at scale. So another question just prompted out to the panelists, right? Why do you think governance and metadata managements tend to be underestimated during SQL to cloud migrations? Mike, let's start with you.
Well, you hit a nerve for me. This is something I'm passionate about. I guess I've used the shock and awe phrase, ETL is dead. We no longer extract data to transform it to load it back somewhere else. With the power of the cloud, we can do all of that in place. We can virtualize our business rules. And so we really need to take a different approach, change our mindset when it comes to managing our data, because it's really not about the technology. It's about how the users can get insights. We should be spending our time as humans solving business problems, interviewing our customers and determining what transformations need to take place in the data so that we can turn it into information. After all, we're information architects, not just data architects. We're not just moving. There's nothing interesting about just moving data from from on-prem to the cloud. What's interesting is the power that we can get from that the elastic platform that we're moving to, and the power of bringing logic to the data. So we need to take the approach of leveraging metadata first. And I would say, the ETL is dead comment really comes from saying, instead of writing code for our pipelines to transform data into insights, let's consider defining our pipelines in metadata. Let's be, as a data team, as data professionals, let's be data-driven like we're trying to enable our business to be. And let's take a data-driven approach at managing our data. And that's where metadata comes in. Because metadata in the past has more or less been a reactive thing. let's scan our code to determine what the lineage is. Let's scan our code to see what the transformations are that we've coded into business rules. And now I think we should take the approach, and Wordscape actually enables it, and it's why we use the tool, of defining our pipelines in metadata, defining our lineage, mapping our sources to targets in metadata, defining our transformations in metadata, defining our access control in metadata, and then generating the code, whether it's PySpark or SQL or Python or DDL, even SQL views, generate that from that metadata in the appropriate format with consistency, with standards, and it builds a better data platform because it's manageable, because it's consistent, because you have standards, you have enforceable naming conventions, you have all of these things that we struggle so hard to do with manually built pipelines, that now if we take that different approach, it's not about on-prem or the cloud. You can do this on-prem as well, but it's really about taking the approach to modernize our data pipelines to make ourselves be data-driven with that metadata. I'll let somebody else talk now. I'll get off my sandbox. I'm a little bit passionate about that topic.
That's awesome. Yes. Thoughts from the group?
I think the most important thing is it makes the environment scalable, and that's what we're looking for. If we go into an elastic, sizable environment, we want to be able to make the code and all of the elements around it scalable, and having metadata there, it really does make that so much more scalable in the future.
And it makes it much easier, right? Especially in migration, if you have the metadata defined or use automation tools, a lot of time you don't need to change so much code, but you change the target, and then these translations essentially are already defined with the adapters from the tool, right? So you have your metadata in place, and the automation essentially does a lot of changes that you need to make on code as well. With governance, I need to say, for me, it's a different topic, especially when we're talking about migration. I wouldn't really, if I talk about a data platform migration, yeah, governance is a huge topic there, but finding data owners and really go deep into governance doesn't really have something to do for me with going in the cloud. And I would also look at it as different projects at this. With the metadata, I think 100% it goes hand in hand. But with governance, for me, it's a little bit something different. I don't know if the other ones agree, but
No, I agree with you, Lorenz. It's peripheral. It is important, but it's not the be all and end all for the migration.
and I think it's organizational then again, where it's more, talking about governance, we're talking about data owners, and
I might slightly disagree, and only on this subpoint. We'd like governance to be owned by the business. I think everybody agrees with that, but yet we've implemented it as code. We've implemented our business rules, our access controls, our policies as code, and so the business can't maintain them. Well, metadata changes, it flips the script there. It allows us to put interfaces around the metadata that let the business define the rules, and then IT enforce them with code. So we can define our governance with metadata and enforce it in generated code. And I think that is at the center of modernization. It's taking that business first approach.
Yeah, I think it may not be the most fun part to actually talk about. Who likes governance? You don't like it, you just suffer it most of the time. But you do need it, of course. And if you're in the cloud, you do need it. I'm going to say more because everything is not on-prem. It's not like physically gapped. But now you have Purview, and if you have one lake and everything is actually there, you can use Purview to make all your governance. And yes, that governance is based on metadata, so it all comes, let's say, from the same bag. So yeah, it is necessary. I think now it's a little bit easier, whereas I think before it used to be a little bit more painful. It's not fun, but it's less painful.
But I still would say it's not part of a migration project. If we just talk about the migration project, we're going to go from SQL Server to Fabric, for example. I think metadata is the key to that. Like I said already, with automation, it makes it so much easier to migrate really and to have the same standards in place. But I think when you then talk about, oh yeah, now let's also introduce governance and build it into our metadata. If you don't have it before, I wouldn't do
Yes.
it together.
If you
Like,
don't have it before, you are actually adding another layer of
yeah,
complexity into your system. Yeah.
That's a really good point. It's something I didn't bring up when we asked, what are the biggest mistakes? But I think the biggest mistake is thinking this is going to be your last migration, because it won't be. It might be your last, but somebody in your organization is going to do another one of these later. And if we haven't
cool.
enabled that to be easier in the process, if we haven't learned something from the fact that we've already migrated from on-prem SQL to Azure SQL to SQL Data Warehouse to Synapse to Fabric, you think the Fabric is Microsoft's last offering in this space? I doubt it, right? So let's prepare for the future. Let's make our process future-proof, and metadata, defining our pipelines in metadata and generating the code allows us to change our templates and generate the code on a new platform later.
100%
And
agree.
that sets us up for future success. We had a client that was already doing that, manufacturing, a name you'd recognize, high volume manufacturing, high tech, 200 terabytes of structured data, 6 petabytes of unstructured data. And they already had their pipelines defined in metadata. We'd helped them build those using Warescape, actually. And so when the migration came to move to the cloud, it was a 99-day activity from the day we started till the day we shut off the legacy environments. That included thousands of users migrating. It was 99 days. We had a goal of 100, and we met it by a day. And we did it only because we had the pipelines defined in metadata. The rules, the business rules of transformations were metadata. We had to migrate. We had to change some of those because some of the SQL wasn't supported in the new platform, or it changed. We had to use a coalesce instead of an isnl or something like that. But 99 days from start to finish, shut off the legacy platforms. I think that's a testament to the future-proof capability of metadata.
So it is without a doubt, and I think everyone here agrees, right? Governance is important, whether it's related to migration or not. Metadata is top dog, right? It is required almost in anything that I say. Please, disagree with me if you guys don't agree, but this is just what I'm reflecting back, what I'm hearing. Is that metadata, it truly just governs everything, truly, and it really it's the way that data engineers and data teams and data organizations needs to utilize today in order to be successful and to gear themselves up for the future. But let's take a little bit of let's look at the flip side of that coin, right? When it comes, metadata is all great, but when it comes specifically to migration, let's talk a little bit about the speed, the cost, and I think we broached a little bit of those topics already, but the speed, the cost, the scalability, and more importantly, the migration patterns, because everything that I'm hearing so far is that if we go way back to the beginning of our panel, I don't think there's such thing as a straightforward migration, unless you're doing maybe a hobby project or something very, very small, but nothing seems ever really straightforward. At the end of the day, you're moving technologies. It is owned by the same parent company in this particular, examples that were given. But there's enough differences that it should be treated as almost a brand new technology that you are migrating it to. Is that a fair statement? That agree, disagree from the panel? All right, I'm going to take that as a resounding yes, everyone agrees. But let's talk quickly about speed, right? So when we talk about speed, cost, scalability, and the migration patterns alone, right? What trade-offs do teams typically make between speed and cost during a migration exercise? And which ones come back to haunt them at a later date? And Dika, let's start with you on that one.
Yeah, I think that the main thing is don't try to replicate what you already have. I think that can be the main temptation, because that may not agree all that well with the target platform. That may not be what you actually need. And in the future, you may have to refactor that to make it actually work properly on the target. An example can be if you're using a lot of procedure code and a lot of complex transformations there, you may not need that. That not may be the optimal way. So you may need to refactor that. The migration is actually a good time to actually use it. And then think that the migration doesn't have to be a one-to-one copy. That is a good opportunity to actually change things. And don't be, within reason, as Lawrence said, you can change things. And now it's an opportunity because the pain is already going to be there. So use it wisely. Use it as an opportunity, not just lift and shift.
So would you prioritize speed or cost?
Well, it has to be as fast as it needs to be. And the classic example is the overnight. It has to be ready at 8 a.m. We've all done that kind of projects. Once you get to 8 a.m., make it as cheap as possible. It doesn't have to be faster than it actually needs to be. But you need to keep in mind, especially for the ingestion part, that things are done as a certain way inside Fabric as well. That may be ADF, that may be landing files. Make sure that you have taken a little bit of time to figure out if that is actually going to work long term, not only inside the sandbox, but when you actually move to the production data.
Thank you on that. Any thoughts or feedback on what
No,
Adika just said?
I think I agree. I mean, I mentioned my points in the beginning. I think always a good sign is most of the time for migrations, you will try to find a sweet spot, right? Where maybe right now you don't have the most use cases or a really important new report coming up. So maybe you have some time for migration. You try to find a good spot for that. I think it's always a good sign when the next use case comes in where the business is like, we need that now, which will happen 100%. If you're ready then to already build it in a new system. If then is the answer, yeah, we are still in the middle of migration and it took longer and stuff like that, we will build it in the old one, then I think the migration was too slow. But in general, I think there's no correct or right there, correct or wrong there, because every project is different, every migration is different, every platform is different. And if we change a lot, it will take longer, but maybe you will make improvements. If you make it quick and maybe don't change a lot, you will get results fast and don't have two systems. So I think you need to find some middle ground.
I've got a quick question for Lorenz because I know you're quite keen on the lift and shift as is methodology. And I get that because it makes things so much easier and comparable. But how do you stop runaway costs when that happens?
I think from, you mean runaway costs like that it gets so expensive in the beginning?
Yeah.
The cloud? This is why I said with the modernization part, for me, this is one of the top priorities to modernize afterwards. So I think if you use automation, like for example, Escape or right, you have some automation in place, most of the time really get it running on the new platform is pretty easy and quick. You change some adapters, some metadatas, you will get it running pretty quick. And then you can compare it, shut off the old system in best place, and then you start with the optimizations. This is my point of view because I had so much problems in the past in the project where they had the old system still running and then you maintain two. And then the business users start saying, yeah, no, build it in the old system. It's so much easier. We know that when you want to build trust in the new one, because so much was changed, there were errors. So I just like this approach more because I think just from a real technical approach, a migration is pretty easy. If you have the backbone in place, right? Metadata in place, automation in place. Yeah, that's what I think. And then one of the first priorities is cost optimization, right? But yeah, it's a good point. You will have some trade-offs there. It will be expensive in the beginning.
Guess what you need to optimize your costs? You need metadata. Guess what you need to provide appropriate context to AI? You need metadata. Guess what you need to scale your team so that when one person leaves and another person comes in so that they can support what was built? You need metadata. I'll get off my sandbox again.
Sounds like metadata is important.
Yeah, sounds like it.
No, that's phenomenal. So and as we're kind of heading towards the end of the hour here, we do have a couple of questions that I think was asked from the audience that I want to bring out for discussion before we get to our sort of closing and takeaways. And I think some of these are really good, right? But I'll start with one. Someone asked, an anonymous attendee here asked, can we lift and shift SSIS packages as is in Fabric? What I mean is, can we do do we need to re-engineer SSIS packages in Fabric or just lift and shift and repoint the target to the target?
In one sentence, I think ETL is dead. I think if you're moving your SSIS, you're not modernizing, you're not taking advantage of the capabilities to land your data and define your pipelines in metadata instead of code.
Thoughts from anyone else? Is SSIS dead?
You could
I'd
generate
say,
SSIS
yeah,
packages from metadata.
I'd say in that context, yeah, you wouldn't use SSIS. You would use something like pipeline, an ADF pipeline, or maybe you would land files directly on OneLake. You have different options, but SSIS would not be what I would use. And then you have to understand that these packages are obscure to you. They're not transparent, as Michael is trying to think about the metadata that I can use and reuse. That is not metadata you can use and reuse. Yeah.
So to take the same situation, let's put on a different hat, right? From a technical perspective, I agree with you guys. I think most people would agree with you. But if I take that off and put on my business hat, right, from a financial perspective, imagine that you're with a client. You have this behemoth of a foundation of data, and you have SSIS packages all over the world. Why would they want to modernize themselves and completely re-engineer and rebuild what they've already have in this sort of situation? I guess what I'm trying to say is like, what is the business? What is the financial gain here? Is it long term? Is it short term? And why? And if you can put any sort of practical examples behind that. Sorry, that was a loaded question, but let me know if I need to rephrase that.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure if I got it, but so I think the first thing I would say is if you would use, so I think you can use SSIS packages in the beginning still, but if you would use them for longer, you would essentially have SSIS running outside of your platform and they load inside of your platform, where even from a logical perspective, it's much more better to have it all in one place and optimized, right? And don't have some old SSIS stuff still running. But I don't know if that really hit the question.
I think that did. Any other thoughts?
Well, we have something now that we didn't have 3 years ago, and that is the power of LLMs to help with migration. So it's no longer an arduous manual task to turn your SSIS into metadata and then generate your new packages, your new code. You can leverage, and we've successfully leveraged LLMs, whether it's Copilot. Frankly, Copilot's not my favorite at this. It's not as good as I think we have primarily a Microsoft audience here, but I'll just say Copilot's I've found to be my least favorite of the LLMs, having used a bunch of them, and probably Claude being the most capable. But leveraging those LLMs, this isn't an advertisement. It's just saying what's worked, in my opinion, is leveraging a powerful LLM to help with those transitions, so that in the end you've accomplished that feature readiness that we talked about, what metadata brings to the table.
Great. Thank you. All right. One last question from another audience member, and then we'll do the closing and takeaways here, because I got a rapid fire closing round that I want to share with you guys. It'll be real quick, but I want to get through this first. Last question. This is from someone in the audience. How does the role of a DBA, I'm assuming database analyst, change post-migration? What can the DBA do to be relevant post-migration, and what skills needs to be acquired to continue to add value post-migration?
I think the first thing to do is get trained, right? It is what it is. It sounds a little bit harsh, but you need to learn a new platform. But I think from what you're doing, it isn't that much different. It's just a different environment, I would guess. But yeah.
Still a lot of relevance in their role. It's just as Lorenz said, they need to understand the nuances of the new platform and understand that. And that is difficult if you've been been a SQL Server DBA for many years. But it's the way that the world's moving towards cloud. We just need to embrace it.
Great. Thank you for that. All right. As we approach the end here, I got one last rapid fire closing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a question and you have 15 seconds, one sentence, just to answer it, whatever feels is on your heart and mind. So rapid fire closing, right? And we'll start, and I'm just going to go off the position on my screen here. And Carl, I'm going to start with you. One piece of advice for teams about to start a SQL to an Azure or a SQL to Fabric migration. Go.
Keep it simple. It really is. As Lorenz said, try and keep it as simple as possible.
Great. Lorenz.
Yeah, first of all, I would agree. Keep it simple, define the scope well, so that everybody knows what we are talking about and how much work you really want to do. And then focus on metadata, I think is a good way to go. But then I want to hand over to Michael here to give his
Yeah,
point.
I think
he
you all know
can,
what I'm going to say, right?
yeah.
Prepare for your future, make your team scalable, focus on your business, and metadata is at the core of that. Be data driven in as a data organization.
Great, thank you. And Mindika, finally, Indika.
Yeah, I'd say learn the platform, and there's a lot of fun things, a lot of fun features. It's more don't see it as like a challenge, see it as an opportunity to. If you're like a DBA, I don't know, Fabric is like Disney World. Think about it that way.
And please shut the old system down. Really important. Shut it down at some point.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you to our panelists for sharing their real world experience and really just the hard-earned lessons. And really, honestly, thank you for everyone who's decided to take the last 60 minutes with us and just hear through some really great opinions and discussions around SQL migrations, whether you're moving to Fabric or moving to SQL, or sorry, Synapse or Azure SQL. Honestly, if there's one takeaway, and that is that successful migration isn't about moving faster, as have talked about extensively. It's about moving deliberately and with the right architectural and operational foundations in place. For more information on how Warescape can help you modernize your existing SQL environment or accelerate your migration, look out for an email from our team to set up a product demonstration, and we'll be happy to walk you through all of that to see just how Warescape can help you guys with your migration efforts today. Again, panelists, thank you so much for your time. We really value your opinion and your expertise and knowledge that you brought to the table, and I am 100% sure that it has brought a lot of value to everyone who has attended and listened to us today. Thank you very much for your time. And until next time.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.